dispatching unit staffing needs for elevator complaints. The overview: New York City Housing Authority is a public development corporation providing safe and affordable housing for low and moderate income people across 5 boroughs of New York City. New York City Housing Authority, with over 300 plus developments and close to 500,000 residents, is the most significant housing authority in North America. The Emergency Services Department represents the New York City Housing Authority after regular hours. They serve complaints across multiple boroughs between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. 4 p.m. and 8 a.m. 16 hours, 4 shifts, with each shift staff working 4 hours. The department plans to set up a dispatching unit for elevator complaints as they notice a surge in elevator complaints in the past year. Management is looking for the optimal staffing of dispatchers for the new department per shift. So very, very clear explanation of what the issue is. Using historical data, we can calculate the average number of elevator complaints per hour during the Emergency Services Department service, the 16 hours. The event that a dispatcher receives an elevator complaint is a random independent event against the interval of time. We can find the average number of elevator complaints about the 16-hour time interval based on historical information. With the nature of the event and the information, we have the Poisson distribution that can be applied to evaluate the probability of a certain number of events per time interval. The current budget allows for 4 dispatchers. With training, the dispatchers can attend 2 calls per minute. Calculating the Poisson probability distribution for the occurrence of various numbers of calls will give management a fair idea if the current staffing of 4 dispatchers is sufficient to handle the incoming complaints about elevators. If the Poisson probability for 8 calls per minute is high, it indicates optimal staffing. A high Poisson probability for less than 4 calls might mean an overstaffed dispatching unit. If the Poisson likelihood for more than 12 calls is high, it might indicate potential short staffing, and management should take proactive measures to address the staffing issue. So you can see that's a real complete description. No computations necessary, just a description of what the problem is, the data source, why this is an appropriate methodology. And let me mention again, because some of you are still handing in write-ups that have charts and equations and output. That's not the purpose. It should be a narrative. And keep in mind, it shouldn't be more than 1 page. Some of you are going over by a little, and that's no different from giving me 3-point type and fitting it into half a page. But some of you are like writing 3 or 4 pages. That's not the idea. The idea is to be concise, to express it concisely. Okay. Next, Ola Cabs is India's largest cab hailing service and is currently locked in fierce competition with Uber to claim absolute market dominance in India, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. As the head of pricing and allocation strategy, I have access to the customer and driver support call teams that address any potential grievances that could not be handled by the phone app. Since my organization is a startup, we're constantly on the hustle and don't always find a use for statistical techniques in our day-to-day operations. Hence, my current call center resource estimations are done based on simple linear mathematics. I have been planning my call center requirements by analyzing the maximum number of calls being received per day on a moving average basis and allotting resources accordingly. This type of planning is unfortunately leading to above average idle times of the call center, with the current average being 30% during a working day, excluding lunch breaks. I would want to minimize this idle time to 15%, the industry average, while still maintaining a healthy resource count to handle the days when we will see high call volume. So this was great. Here, there's a description of this is what we've been doing now, and it doesn't work so well. And why doesn't it work so well? Because it's not taking into account variability. It's not taking into account uncertainty. When you use a moving average for forecasting, you're assuming pretty much deterministic behavior, all right? And you're saying that There's some random variation, but what you expect in the future is best captured by taking an average of, say, the last 7 days. Not looking at the whole history because things change over time, but looking at very recent history. That's what a moving average is. But it doesn't incorporate the probabilistic behavior. So now, with my newfound knowledge of the Poisson distribution, I can assess the probability of different expected numbers of calls per hour and plan my resource allocation more efficiently. The solution would have 2 parts: reduce the measurement time period from per day to per hour for better accuracy while using the Poisson distribution. I'll calculate the average number of calls received per hour. I now have my defined area of observation and the average count of the event. And then second, use the Poisson distribution to estimate the probabilities of different numbers of calls per hour. I'll calculate the probability of receiving 1, 2, 3, etc. calls per hour. I'll consider all the outcomes that have a relatively higher individual probability of occurrence while having a cumulative probability of about 90%. Since I'm only counting those events which have a higher probability of occurrence, this will result in a lower number of expected calls for the hour a day. I'll plan my resources according to this new expected call volume, which will be less than my previous estimations. I expect that the resulting effect of this type of planning will be twofold. I'll reduce my upfront cost of resources by keeping a smaller number of active callers per day, and my call center's average idle time will be reduced from the current high of 30%. So this was also interesting because often when we're talking about staffing decisions, it's because we don't have enough staff and they are too busy, they're utilized at too high a rate, and we can't keep up with the demand. Here's a situation where we can actually have cost savings by reducing the level of service, reducing the idle time somewhat. Okay, an individual may use the Poisson distribution to measure the probability that an event occurs in a given area of opportunity, etc. Okay, that's just a description of the Poisson. As the manager of the administration staff for the oncology offices at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, I can apply a Poisson distribution to determine the probability of a certain number of phone calls that a given physician's office may receive during lunch hours. With this distribution known, it would be possible for me to ensure that adequate coverage is assigned during the lunch hour of the office secretary. The Poisson distribution can be applied because the issue being measured satisfies all the properties of the Poisson distribution. Number of phone calls is within an area of interest, the hours, the probability of phone calls are received, an equal probability to occur, and the likelihood that any single phone call coming into the office is independent. The likelihood of any single phone call coming in is independent of any other call. By applying the Poisson distribution to the incoming calls to our oncology practices, it becomes possible to properly allocate phone support resources to ensure that all incoming calls can be answered in a timely fashion and minimize the risk of missing any urgent patient needs during the times of reduced staffing due to staff meal periods. And that's an important issue, by the way. The Poisson distribution, when we assume lambda equals 10 calls per hour, let's say, it's very important that we're talking about a time period where that lambda is stationary or constant. In other words, if I have variable periods of demand, which is what's being described here, so there's the non-lunch hours, and well, I shouldn't say it's not exactly what's being described here. There's nothing about the non-lunch hours. But let's say we have we're talking about arrivals at a bank in an office, but a bank branch in an office building. All right, and those are random and independent events. Well, when they don't occur at a constant rate over the entire day, what kind of pattern would we have? Even with random and independent events, the average number of customers coming in per hour is going to be much higher during lunch hour and after work than it is between, say, 10 and 11 a.m. People are working. All right, lunch hour, they come down, they stop at the bank branch or at the ATM machine. it would not be correct to use one overall lambda for the entire day. You would have to divide the day up into common periods. So the non-busy times, the times that people are working in their offices, that would be whatever lambda turns out to be, an average of 2 per hour. During lunch hour, lambda is 10 per hour. That's a different Poisson calculation. So we calculate Poisson probabilities specific to the behavior during that period. All right, we don't average it out over an entire day if the average actually changes. All right, ForCatalyzer is a startup accelerator that supports select startup companies strategically, administratively, legally, and commercially with regulatory agencies, and offers design, engineering, software platforms, and manufacturing to accelerate their program. One of the ForCatalyzer company, Butterfly Network, Butterfly Network, sells portal ultrasound to healthcare professionals. Butterfly uses its e-commerce portal to sell their products direct to consumers. The marketing team accelerates the website visits with targeted digital ads and tracks the traffic and clicks to convert the clicks to order. As head of financial reporting, I work closely with the marketing and sales team to project the rollover forecasts, monthly, quarterly, and annual revenue projections. One of the critical inputs that the marketing team shares is the average number of website clicks every day and the conversion to deal. The sales projections for the direct e-commerce channel heavily use the Poisson distribution. The number of successes counted, or number of clicks per day, and the mean number of hits during the specific interval of days will be used for calculating probability. Using the Poisson distribution, the probability that the number of clicks per day is higher than X gets calculated. This data point is critical for revenue projections in finalizing the rollover financial forecast. So you have a number of different applications in different industries. As I said, a lot of the submissions refer to staffing needs, which is a very common use of the Poisson distribution. We'll also see in the spring that we can use the Poisson distribution in, as I told you, in queuing theory to determine not just staffing needs, but needs for equipment, needs for space, to accommodate the demand, etc. So let's now get back to confidence intervals.